can see.
On your phone?
No, it's on my computer.
Carolyn, can you see it?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up right now.
Okay. Hey, Reverend Andrea. Blessings, blessings. You said, Michael, you said, how was last Sunday's episode? Did you watch it, Michael Jones? Junior? Hey, Marlon. Hey, Dr. Brenda. Hey, Regina. All right, so yeah, we are able to talk to everyone in the YouTube chat. So we'll go ahead and get started. We won't be here too long, but just enough time to have a really great conversation to go a little bit deeper and expand consciousness and really peel back the layers in this beautiful thing called P Valley. So first of all, Reverend Cherie is resting. She's resting. She is preaching a whole sermon by not being here right now. Her body said that she needed rest. And so that is what she's doing. She is resting, being refreshed and restored. And so let that be the first thing you take away from today's conscious conversation, to listen to your body when it says you need rest. It's very important. So she will be back with us next week, but we are sending her thoughts and prayers and holding space for her refreshment. All right. Okay, and so let's just go through and do a little introduction. Does that sound good? So everybody can know who we are. Let's start with Sterling up there. I love his t-shirt. Can you tell us a little bit about you? And yeah.
Jesus Christ. I'm just gonna keep it brief, which is not one of my usual fortes. I'm Dr. Sterling Watson, he, him, his, if you can see that on the screen. I am a licensed psychologist, and I am currently the Assistant Director of Training at the University of South Carolina, where I am responsible for training new psychologists to come into the field to do the work that I think we're going to talk about tonight. I am also an ordained elder. I believe that what my shirt says, prayer and therapy works. I do a number of other things, another number of odds and ends, but I think that that's probably good enough. And so that's who I am. I am Shamika's classmate, Central State University, for God, for Central State, Marauders for life. This is how we do. We support one another. We show up for one another. And so I'm just excited to be a part of this panel with you all to talk about mental health.
Awesome. I did not know you were ordained, so that is amazing. Lynea.
Hello, my name is Lynea Diaz-Hagen, and I am, I would say I like that phrase, odds and ends. There are lots of odds and ends. So I am a multidisciplinary artist turned EFT coach. I specialize in acupressure tapping, energy healing work with artists specifically, and then find my way into many different areas, but that's the primary orientation: energy healing work, meditation, visualization work, specifically for artists.
Wonderful. And Miss Sandra Bishop.
Hi, I am Sandra Bishop, and I am a licensed ordained minister, but I like to tell people I am open at the top. And so I find and see God in all, through all, as all. And so you may hear some stuff out of me that you may not expect. I also have been in radio and television and podcasting, and I write, and I am a trainer, speaker, all of those things, all wrapped up into how I'm manifesting today. So I've got a lot of stuff that I'm into. So yes.
Yes.
Awesome.
Teach the lesson. Teach the lesson.
And y'all know me. I am Shamika Cotton. I play Farrah on P Valley. All of these people are very, very special to me. I'm so grateful for that all of you said yes. Let's see, where do we even begin? So episode 6 was a very intense episode, very intense episode. We had a lot of the stories moving forward, but I think the big talk of episode 6 would be the story about Big Teak and Little Murder. Or Little Murder. I keep saying Little Murder, but Little Murder. And I remember at the table read for this episode and hearing Jay Alphonse and John do their scenes. And by the end of the table read, there was not a dry eye at the table. It was just silence. And so to see it on Sunday, to see them bring life to those words was even more powerful and riveting. Even at the screening, I was in Cleveland on Sunday and we had another screening hosted by the wonderful people over at Greater Cleveland Urban Film Festival. Thank you all again for having me and creating space for P-Valley. At the end, we had to take a collective breath together just to like inhale and exhale because I could sense that everyone was still holding their breath from all that had happened. And even Miss Sandra, you had to get up and go, right?
I was triggered big time,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to walk out of the room. I did.
And
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. I had, back when I was in college, I saw a man put a gun to his head and shoot himself, kill himself. And the threat of that just, I didn't even realize that that was why I was triggered until after I reflected back on that. And I just could not. But P-Valley does that to me. I mean, we get triggered a lot by the things that are going on in here. Yeah.
wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
No idea. Yeah, that was a lot. And what I'm grateful for about the episode, it's that it's opening up the conversation for what Lil Murder said when he went to see Uncle Clifford. I'm not okay.
Mm.
And just saying those words give me chills because it was so powerful. I'm not okay. And I think that that is one of the first places to begin is to recognize when you're not okay. It's okay not to be okay. But then how do you go about getting the help that you need? And I will share that when I was going through my moment, where are we at? This was about maybe 6 years ago, when I was going through my depressive episode, my friend, my line sister, Toyette, called Sterling to reach out to help me. He called me to help me. So sometimes, you know, you can lead your friends and your family to get help. And that was one thing that I saw on the screen that they post for NAMI to get help. On the end, on the bottom, it said, how do you help someone? And I think a lot of times that part goes unseen, right? You think about, you know, if you're going through and you're having suicidal ideations and things like that, you can call that number. But what if you are the person that needs to help someone? How do we do that?
And, you know, in our community, we have a tendency to push down things so much. There's this thing, this idea of man up or, you know, suck it up, or we have, you know, it's almost as if there is this peer pressure to just deal with what it is that we're going through. But as we watch these things, we also have to learn how to watch for ourselves, you know, to know when you're triggered or to know when, you know, how to identify certain situations or sensations in your own body. And so if we haven't done our own work, and then we find ourselves watching something that is as traumatic as some of these things can be, yeah, we don't always have Toy to make the call for us.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure out how to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're sharing, because I think that there is something that's really real about being able to acknowledge, the stigma that still surrounds us not being okay. And so Shamika shared that was a very powerful statement. I'm not okay. And how often can we say that? How often can we admit to that, especially if our culture, right, suggests that, let's say for our Black women, you have to be a strong Black woman, and whatever that means, or, like you just said, Sister Sandra, man up, like whatever that means, And in the episode, what was jarring to me, and it was a lot of stuff going on in there, but what was jarring to me was recognizing that the brother was experiencing trauma, and not just trauma from his release from prison, but trauma from his childhood, and how often we don't really address all of those things that leads to us being young adults or adults or grown, 45, 50 years old, and still trying to navigate the trauma of our childhood that we have never talked about, never expressed, because in our family systems, keep it in-house. You don't go out and you don't tell your dirty laundry, right? That didn't happen. It didn't happen the way that you think it happened. No, it happened the way that I thought it happened, but the invalidation that begins to occur that creates this necessity for us to build these walls and these barriers. And, as I think about that, and I think about the work that I do with the young men that I work with, whether it's in the church or whether it's, at the university, one of the things that I recognize when I'm working with folks is that there's often this underlying what we now call complex trauma, blah, 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 that our history and our experiences create such a foundation for how we think about mental health, how we shun it, how we run away from it, how we don't have these conversations. And there's a quote by Frederick Douglass: it's easier to build strong children. That's it. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I think that what I see in this particular episode is that case with Big T. He was a child who experienced trauma, and he was broken by that trauma, and it replicated itself in such a way that, we see him not being able to manage or handle the post-release and everything else that was going on with him in that particular episode. So
I'd like to just to follow on that phrase, I'm not okay. I think that there's the I'm not okay, the shame that comes with admitting, I'm feeling broken. What we see in Teak in this episode is that he's feeling broken, helpless, and desperate to the point that there is no out. Like there's a line, he says something like, I'm going from the night into the darkness into the light. For him, there was only one way out. And I think one of the things that I think about is, what are the emotions that we're so afraid of that we can't sit with, right? What can we viscerally not sit with? And I think so often there's shame, right? There's shame at being brokenness, at brokenness. And I think also with this episode, Sandra, you mentioned how the show in and of itself is triggering justice. There's a lot in there. And I watched episode 6 today for this, and I'm familiar with Key Valley, but I haven't seen all of it yet. And I had the thought as I was watching, and I was like, wow, this show has so much about sexuality and trauma and history that it would bring up shame in people just by watching it, right? And so I just think it's interesting, like, what emotions can we sit with? What can our bodies tolerate? And I think, in relation to PTSD, there's our systems can only tolerate so much. And I think when someone's in that state, there's a sense of like, I don't know what's happening to me, almost, right? And so that adds to another layer of articulation and shame that's just part of the whole entire thing. So there's something about that word that I think resonates when it comes to this conversation.
Yeah, there was so much in the episode of him uh, walking back through his childhood home and seeing himself. And it would have been very interesting, which is the show is not necessarily about healing per se. But it would have been interesting had he been able to talk to or comfort his child self instead of just having to close the door and run back out. There is, when we talk about this idea of repair, how can we be about repair and not feel as if we're not how do I want to say, not being the man that we could be or the woman that we should be when we're seeking repair. There's a part of us that does not want others to see us bleed, so to speak. But for just a second, Miss Mississippi has two children that are under the age of 3 that is watching all of this unfold. And so as we see the trauma, the trauma that people are living through, we're also seeing the trauma that children are growing up in. And these stories, as we look at it and it seems like it should be new, like P-Valley, Pussy Valley. I like to invoke that word. Because there's a part of us that I think we don't own our own bodies. We don't own ourselves. And so as long as we're in that disconnect, we can sit and look at our TV screen and think something is inherently wrong with what is going on. But this is the life that so many people have lived through. So as we're looking at this and we're thinking about it in terms of repair, we're watching these little children as their mother goes off and, for a couple of weeks and then coming back and they've been beaten and abused by a man who is an abuser. We see this played out over and over again through this thing. And it's what we're doing with our bodies and very little about what we're doing with our emotional selves. And so, yes, this triggers me, but it's, but on the other side of it is you want to say, but it's so good, and is it so good because we can relate to it? Okay, I'll press pause.
But as I watched everyone taking in the season up until now, a lot of people had a lot of opinions about Big Teak, and they thought he was angry or overreacting. They didn't understand why he was responding the way he did to the police brutality or why he was so protective, a little murder. They didn't understand that. And I thought that those elements of the story really showed how trauma shows up in people's behaviors. And in the article that Essence wrote, that was in Essence, John said a beautiful thing. And he said that he feels like a lot of times we only acknowledge the scars that we can see on the skin. And there's not a lot of compassion for the scars that are in the heart. And I feel like it's hard sometimes to see that. And I'm grateful to see that they showed how they show up in the world so that we can kind of start looking at each other with more kindness and compassion. And maybe instead of judging, saying, I wonder what's their story.
Right. So the question, let me circle back on that. When Teak is protecting Lil Murder, is he really protecting him as his cellmate, lover, or is he protecting his child self? Is this the protector he wished he had had.
Yeah,
I think there's room for it to be both.
You know, I think that there's so much complexity, right, to the function, you know, of our trauma or the function of our navigating it and managing it. And so, you know, even though I haven't seen that particular episode, what comes to mind as you share that is that, you know, we begin to build, you know, ways to navigate the world and experience the world that's safe for us. And sometimes, and particularly for men, right, through this kind of lens of masculinity, you know, whatever we want to call it, or toxic masculinity, as it's now termed a lot of times, you know, we see this kind of role, you know, that's taken on through, you know, the aggressiveness and the toughness, you know, through the kind of bravado, you know, that demonstrates, you know, I'm not to be messed with, right? You know, that helps to kind of wall off some of the emotional pain that that person may actually be experiencing. And so I think that, you know, it's really important to consider, you know, all of the multiple complexities, you know, of us coming into ourselves from the developmental experience that young child had that you talked about, Sandra. You know, from this particular episode, he's walking through it. He's seeing it. He's you know, and now that you say that, I wonder if the images, as I think about it, you know, from him moving room to room, were actually the images that he saw as a child and not what was actually going on in the particular scene, and just kind of remembering and processing, you know, all of that pain, you know, that then shows up in, you know, the aggression and the, you know, the behaviors that we see, you know, and so, and that happens, you know, that happens. So I agree with you, Shamika, when you say that, you know, when we know someone's story, you know, we might be less quick to judge, you know, less quick to kind of promote the shame that they already feel and validate them, to not see them, to not allow them to have their voices heard, you know. And so that's just the thought that popped into my head as you were saying, Sister Sandra.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I guess I wanted to point out too is that as he moved through the house, it reminded me of Beloved. Right? When that thing of moving through the house and the ghosts that are still there. It was such a powerful scene. And it spoke volumes. But the other part of that is it seems so much easier for our community. And I like to talk about our community in a historical framework, because we come from a people whose bodies have been owned that are not our own. And there are so many people who still feel as if they can offer you their body, but not their emotional self. This emotional self I'm going to keep over here, right? But this body up here, I can offer it to you and give it to you, but we don't also know what that does to our own psyche and our own soul when we put that out there. It's almost as if we have what's the word, that cognitive dissonance, right? That where we're separating ourselves, and so we can't, you know, there's a problem with us coming together and owning our full selves. And I think that to some extent that's a lot of the healing work that we need to do.
I want to sort of mention the body. Like, I think that in one of the scenes, I think it's at the gas station, Teak, it's sort of explosive with the guy who says, I think he's just calling for more gas, like, you know what I mean? He's just saying something, right? And so it's completely out of proportion. And and he explodes. And I think that, one of the things that for people who haven't experienced the visceral experience of trauma and PTSD, don't necessarily know that literally the body has a completely different reaction. It's not just about what I think or an interpretation. It's that the whole entire system is maybe flooded, maybe like literally jarred. I mean, the whole entire nervous system has taken on a different response to circumstances. And I think that's, I think it's just important to note that, because I think when people don't have that experience, that visceral shift where they've experienced a trauma and they all of a sudden recognize, I shake when this happens, or I'm now angry, or I dissociate and time changes. In the episode, we see a compression of time, like that there's the past and present is no longer what we thought it was. And we see that in Beloved as well. And so that's a symbolic thing. And it's also quite literally a visceral and biochemical thing that's happening in the body. And I think when people understand that better, we can be more sympathetic to somebody's experience of what's happening right now. It's not the same as mine at this moment. And if it's happening to you, I think that there's a possibility, maybe the more we educate ourselves and our community about it as well, like to actually say, what is dissociation? What does it mean to feel out of my body? What does it mean that I am so disconnected from this that I will, what am I thinking about? Like play roulette with myself, you know what I mean? I'll put myself in, there are all of these things that we do that we don't recognize as that separation. And so I love that the episode, it just felt very, very viscerally true to me, and it's interesting. Yeah.
Sherry over on, because I'm on Instagram, they're just listening on Instagram and looking at me. But Sherry Milligan makes a wonderful comment to what you said, Lynea. The nervous system will have the body take on survival mode.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Precisely.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you said this already, Lynea, but Lynea is also my EFT practitioner. Did you speak on what EFT is?
Yes, so EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's essentially an alternative healing modality for lots of things. It's acupressure. It's a combination of acupressure, so you're tapping meridian points, which calms the nervous system, but also exposure therapy. So at the same time, you articulate specific, let's say challenges, issues, could be traumas that you're bringing into consciousness while you're essentially relaxing the nervous system's response to it. And so it's a somatic process, and that's been, I think, clinically studied specifically with trauma and PTSD and anxiety, and with veterans. And so there's been a lot of work with VA clients, and I found my way there through many meanderings through psychotherapy, healing, et cetera. But it was the way to get to things that didn't have words. Right. And so that's.
And usually, and so to that thing too, there are people who have experienced trauma that don't have words for it, especially if it happened when you were, a little kid, or you don't know exactly what it was so we sometimes feel things in our body that we don't know about in our heads because we don't have the words for it. So moving that energy, or being able to deal with that in an embodied way is wonderful. Yeah.
You have to consider like what happens at the point of trauma, right? And how we respond, how the brain responds. One of my colleagues, she is a book, Dr. Sarah Wright, and she uses the language of cortisol. She talks about stress and how our bodies kind of respond to stress. And so if there is a significant amount of stress and stress hormone release at the point of the trauma, then it's highly likely when we experience things that are similar to it, that our bodies, our brains are going to remember that, and is going to kind of engage in that startle response, or, the dissociation, or, the kind of anxious experience that we might have. So, there is that combination of biology and brain and cognitive appraisal an effective response that happens when we experience trauma, or we relive it, or we replay it. And then it takes form in depression, and other kind of mental health concerns. And so.
Right. And I think, a lot of times, we look at a lot of people who, we didn't have, and I'll just speak for me, prior to a certain point in time, we didn't even have the verbiage to call it trauma. We didn't have, the post-traumatic slave syndrome,
Right.
Until a few years ago, right? We didn't realize that even some of the things that when I got a whooping, whether or not that was trauma, or to see the things that we see in our community, we didn't have the words to call it trauma. Nowadays, we go around and we talk about trauma as if everyone should know what trauma is, or if they've experienced trauma. But the fact of the matter is that our community has been through so much. And there is that little test that you take. Is it adverse childhood
Events.
Checklist.
Yes.
Childhood.
Yeah. It's like 10 or 15 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And in our community, there are questions like, did you experience this when you were growing up? Did you experience that? So to hear somebody yelling at you, or to have fighting in the home, or to, receive a whooping, when our community goes through that, and they're talking about indicators for trauma, I don't know very many people that don't score way high on that.
Right.
I mean, and so when we talk about what it is our community is going through, I think that part of, and I'll say this, one of the reasons why P-Valley is so intoxicating, or we're so drawn to it, is because we can relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when Farrah confronts her husband and says, "You don't know what I want," and as if I have been here with you and you haven't even seen me nor been concerned with what I want. I mean, that's real.
Yeah.
That's real. We are told as children, you're to be seen and not heard. And then when you get older and you're Miss Beautiful Candy on my arm kind of thing, they still don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this, I'm sorry. I'm just, this stuff is real.
If I add another element to it, right? Like if you think about the psycho-historical trauma of our people, right? We already talked about our bodies, and our bodies being bought and sold, our bodies being tortured, our bodies being raped, male and female, throughout history. There is something that I think that happens with transgenerational trauma, that occurs, that's passed from generation to generation. And so we don't necessarily have the language, though we know how to respond to keep ourselves safe. And so our trauma response is often us keeping ourselves safe from potential threat or potential harm. Because, if I respond to this whooping that I'm getting, then I might get whooped more.
I'm gonna give you something to cry about.
Right, I'm gonna give you something to cry about, right? And so we learn how to not advocate, not speak up, and we suffer in silence, all of these experiences that then, again, manifest in some sort of behavior, some sort of, emotional distress, when it's too much for us to actually handle, too much for us to actually manage, right?
So I want to just jump in and put in what some people are saying in this comments, because they're going at it on Instagram. I didn't know y'all were going to stay here and listen this way. But yes, about the trauma being in the body. We have, Sherry said, what did you say, Sherry? That sometimes the trauma is trapped in the body. And then Shanae Gibson, forgive me. And we wonder why we have so many chronic illnesses. I believe it comes from stress and trauma not dealt with. Anyone want to speak about that?
You know, I talk about this a lot because there have been some amazing people that have done work around this. So first off, Sterling brought up this the trauma that lives within our cell tissue. It's called epigenetics for anybody who is interested in looking up that. And it is inherited trauma that comes from generations. In the Bible, it says the sins of the father are visited upon the son up to 4 generations. And there have been studies that show that the trauma stays in our system sometimes longer than the 4 generations because we keep repeating it in order to heal it. One of the things that Carolyn Myss, MYSS, wrote about in Anatomy of the Spirit is how our trauma, or how the things that happen to us, can get locked in what we call our chakra system. And so at times, especially when we have family trauma, the family trauma is like from the 3rd chakra down. So the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, we get a lot of cancers. We get a lot of, like, whether we're talking about prostate cancer, cervical cancer, we get a lot of cancers that are related to those things, back aches and back pains. All of that stuff can be traced to some of the stressors that are, that we have accumulated over the years, especially as women in our sex organs. We haven't even reclaimed that half the time. I don't want to preach on that, but
that's why you're here.
There is so much information out there nowadays that talks about how we have this stuff locked in, and it really, if you could think about it as a thought form metastasized, that is that's how we get sick. And we don't realize that we go to the doctor and expect the doctor to give us a pill or cure us, but it's not a medical thing. You need to go to a psychiatrist. You need to go to somebody that's going to help you unlock the mental blocks, and not everybody is up to that task. But do some reading around that, because this stuff is real. It's real. And meditation. I'm a firm believer in meditation.
Epigenetics. You said, would you say meditation?
Yes, and meditation, but epigenetics is what it's called.
And that's one of the main reasons why I'm so happy that Lynea is here and a part of this conversation, because she has helped me work through a lot of things in my body and heal them. We have the potential to heal ourselves, but we have to know who to go to get that help to walk us through that healing journey. And Lynea, we've been working together for almost 2 years now, maybe by now. Yeah. And she has helped me through a lot. Alvin Two Stacks in Instagram says, we need to break generational trauma and more therapy in our community. But that's the way that we break it, by getting therapy, by finding out all the different types of healing modalities. Some people are maybe averse to talk therapy. So I would love for you all to share other healing modalities that get people started. Lynea, you talked about EFT. What else could you all offer to someone else who might say, well, I don't know if that's for me? Well, find something that is for you. What do you all say?
Well, I think that there's a continuum, right? And that we're not monolithic by any stretch of the imagination, right? And so we have to utilize, the number of ways in which we can kind of, improve our mental health. So for example, you see my t-shirt, prayer and therapy, I believe in prayer, prayer works, prayer, outside of therapy can be helpful, but with them in conjunction, you've got a winning team. If you're doing some physical activity, right? I think that getting your body moving, reclaiming your body, right? That is a part of the process. I love when Sandra said meditation. I'd spend maybe about 10-15 minutes of meditation during my afternoon time, where I just kind of take a moment and I just silence everything out, because I'm always going, right? And so, meditation, it doesn't have to be, you're sitting still and saying, it could just be witnessing a bumblebee fly, and just being attentive and engaged and present and in the moment with what's happening in your surroundings. Talk therapy, is good, but there are different kinds of therapies, so some folks may be responsive to a cognitive behavior therapy. I am a cognitive behavior therapist, right? I do a lot of different modalities. That's not the only modality that I practice, because I'm trained in a number of different modalities. But some people are very responsive to, the restructuring of how we process information, where some other people want to delve into the depth, of their experience and explore, kind of the and intrapsychodynamic experience that they might be experiencing, right? And so there's so many different ways, some people may benefit from engaging in group therapies where they can have spaces where they can have the, hopefully, the space where they can develop vulnerability with other people who might have similar experiences with them. Because I think that when we hear everybody else's experiences, it helps. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. If I was to preach that, right? Your healing may be helpful for my healing, right? And so if I know some parts of your story, then I might recognize, this is something that I can work through too, right? And so those are some of the things that just kind of pop off my head. Lynea, Sandra, what do you guys got?
I'd like to dive into that idea, like the multiple modalities, by saying one thing, which is, I think it's important for everybody to know that if you want to get better, that there is a way. Meaning, you hear people say, I've tried psychotherapy, it didn't work. And I'll just really briefly speak to my own experience. When I was in my mid-20s, which was 2 decades ago, I developed PTSD. Like it was, meaning there was one day I didn't have it, trauma happened, 2 months later, I had it, right? So I had a very clear contrast between what it felt to be okay and flashbacks, everything, like the whole entire world fell apart. And I read in a book that basically said, people do not recover from PTSD, right? And I remember thinking my life is over. Like I slept with a suicide hotline by my bed for about a year. So it was kind of like my life is over. And so that began the journey of digging into modalities and just recognizing I need to find people who believe I can get better. So I just say that for some people may feel that I'm in such a dark place that there isn't hope for me. There's hope for that other person. I just think it's important just to say that, like, no, there's hope for you. There's always somebody who has a way to help pull you out. And so just in terms of things, I feel like I went through Reiki, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, group therapy. Hakomi is an interesting method. There's a Hakomi method, which is, I don't know enough about it to pitch it, so I will just say it so people can float that. There's obviously EFT and tapping. Acupressure, craniosacral therapy. I'm mentioning a lot of the somatic modalities because that's where I went. And then, of course, meditation and yoga. And I do think, I'll mention you, Shamika. One of the things that I have noticed in working with different clients, and when you're working with artists, you're often working with people who are very sensate, very emotional. So there's a fluidity, right? Which is convenient if you're working with from a healing perspective, in the sense that there's a sensitivity and in-touchness with the emotions a lot of the time. And I often find that people who do develop like meditation or body practices have an extra tool. So even if you don't want to go to therapy, if you try yoga for a while or you meditate for a while, it almost gives you more tools for, I'll just say, tolerating the stuff you don't want to deal with when you start going into deeper stuff. So I just think that just recognizing that body work like understanding your body from a sport or a movement perspective is just a tool to make it easier to do psychotherapy and other things.
Yeah, I love this question because it opens up so much. And so I think I told y'all at the top of the hour, don't expect any of the normal stuff out of me, right? So I will tell you, I have been through my fair share of trauma. But one of the things that I found that worked for me was this idea. So let me first say, I am an advocate for prayer, but not prayer in the traditional sense that many of us learned from going to a traditional church, where we down begging God, oh, please, Master Lord, do something. And I'm not trying to make light of this, but this is kind of how we have learned.
But that's true though. That's how we've learned.
Yes,
so,
that's how
we don't really know the effectual power of prayer because we've learned how to pray a certain way.
Yeah, and we've learned to externalize God.
Right.
We've learned that God is out there, up there. And since we don't have a personal relationship, it makes it hard to make that connection because somebody told us we were nothing more than filthy rags. And who are we in the sight of God? They want to make it seem as though God is unreachable. So to that thing, so I'm saying, yes, I am an advocate for prayer, but if you still praying in that kind of way, I can understand why you don't feel like your prayers are being answered. God is really trying. Whenever you think you're trying to reach God, God is really trying even harder to reach you. And through some of the experiences that you may have gone through or been through, those are experiences that are knocking at the door of your heart and saying, hey, if you just open up, I'm gonna come in. So I said that piece. Now, so the other part of that is I will tell you that we have named a whole lot of acceptable ways of healing. I have heard people talk about ayahuasca, magic mushrooms. I have heard people talk about drug-induced ways of finding out that you can go and transcend beyond this stuff. I haven't tried it as of yet, but I heard some amazing stuff about that. So I wouldn't disregard that. But for me, there is this other piece that, through doing some breath work, that I have really realized that I have been estranged and separated from my body, not just because I myself was raped, but because I have ancestral stuff of bodies being raped. And there is this, as women, we need to own our bodies again. We need to love our bodies again. So if that means that some nights you get naked and dance around the house and just re-inhabit, figure out what it means to feel and to ask ourselves, what parts, what pieces of me am I not acknowledging? Am I not owning? What parts of me does not believe that I should have pleasure? What parts of me have I laid at the altar of somebody else's feet? And until we are ready to reclaim that person, we will probably still be in the same mess. We gotta start, we gotta start loving who we are, the skin that we're in, because this is what you got.
Unapologetically.
Yes, yes. So breath work is powerful. Dealing with your fears is powerful. And one of the things that I learned from Carolyn Miss, she wrote this one book, but I love Anatomy of the Spirit. That one is good enough. But in this one book, she says, liars don't heal.
Yeah.
If you can't be, who was it? Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true. Sometimes people ain't even true to themselves. Liars do not heal. And people who cannot forgive cannot heal. So there's work that we have to do. And sometimes that means falling to your knees and just laying it all out, laying it out on the altar, trying to get an understanding and doing the work. It's just doing the work.
And that's the important part, doing the work. You
Mhm.
know, what I call the healing work, right? We have to do that. You know, like we can pray, similar to what you were talking about, but if we don't do the work, like we may get an answer in the prayer, but if we don't move into action and do what it is that we can do, then and sometimes that lie that you're talking about, that lie that we're stuck, you know, that lie that we can't, you know, that lie that says that it has to be this way, you know, I think keeps us constrained from actually engaging in that healing process, you know, but we have to take action. We have to be about it. We can't just kind of talk about it. We have to go out and do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, there's so much that could be said about this, but you know, one of the things that I want to, because that p-valley is so powerful. Part of it is looking at it and seeing where do you see yourself in it. I mean, it's such a powerful exercise. Like if I had to see myself as a character in p-valley, right? Who would you be? And don't get caught up on the sex of the person, but really look at the dynamics of what they may be going through, because it's all in there. I mean, you know, whether you so whether you're the Mercedes or the Farah or I mean, we could go through and we could name off characters, and just to see yourself in that. I'll tell you, I love all kind of stuff. But when you talk about archetypes, there is this, the prostitute archetype that I find extremely fascinating. One of the best depictions of that was in The Devil Wears Prada. In The Devil Wears Prada, there was a woman who had a dream, and she sold out on her dream for a job. And when we get caught up in jobs, a lot of times we start to, the people that are around us, we start taking on the value system of the people that are around us, right? And we let, who was it? Was it Keyshawn that said the other day that when they were talking about, she was trying to sell the wig line, but then they went for the shoes, and
that was Keyshawn. That was Mississippi.
Right. Okay. And so she was like, but the price point on this one thing is a lot higher than these hooker shoes. And so she was kind of upset about that. In The Devil Wears Prada, this woman is, now that she's in the fashion industry and everybody is making it seem like, oh, you got to go to this and you got to go to Paris and you got to go here. And so all of a sudden it's like, she didn't even see how her values had changed. She didn't stop loving, wanting to be a reporter or writing. She had sold herself out. And so there is this, you know, when we talk about these, you know, the archetype, it is this idea that we're selling off a piece of ourselves, and at what cost and what price? And then who then gets to dictate or set your price? How do you ratchet it? You know, some now all of a sudden somebody is trying to, I mean, there's just so much to chew on when you start to talk about this. So see yourself in p-valley. Ask yourself the questions, whether you're look, I can't even call the names. Uncle
Clifford.
Uncle Clifford or Uncle Clifford's, what's the grandma's name? She's so good at
Oh,
that.
I can't think of her name. That's so bad. But Loretta Devine. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
Loretta, she is. Oh
Yes.
my gosh. I mean, when you just look at the characters, really, where do you see yourself? And what's the issue? Because really it's all in there. It's like Prego. It's all in there. So you got to ask yourself some questions, and then, and how do we get to the place where we're actually living on our dreams? Because like somebody said before, we all hoes for something.
That's what Mercedes said to me. Mhm.
Yeah. And if you're not now, you have been. You've been a hoe at one time. So,
Ernestine, Grandma Ernestine, duh. Thank you. Thank you, Miss 757.
so just asking the question can be like something that cracks this conversation open for you, and journal about it. Journal about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you could be Little Murder, all of them got something. All of them. It's a powerful exercise, I think.
So we could definitely go on forever talking about P-Valley because there's so many levels to it. And I'm just so grateful for the time that you all spent coming here today. There's a lot of talk on YouTube and on Instagram. People are loving what you have to say and they want to know more about you. So Sterling, let's start with you. Where can people find you, or do you have a book or anything? How can they stay in touch with you and follow you?
Oh Lord, I don't do too much social media. I have Instagram professional page at dr.s.p.watson. I don't use it as much, but that would be the way to kind of connect. And so I got some projects in the works, but my day job keeps me very, very busy. So
thank you. And I'm so glad that you came too, because I wanted to have a male facing voice here to talk about this. So thank you for holding that space today and in the work that you do in life, period. It is so important. And just, I honor that. Lynea, what about you?
So I guess the best way to connect with me would be at lineasgarden.com, which is LYNEAS garden.com. And then on social media, I too am not the chattiest on there, but you can find me at LyneaDH, which is LYNEADH on Twitter. That's the best place.
Wonderful. Sandra.
Excellent. So I am on social media and Day. So right here on Facebook, I Sandra Bishop. I see Shamika put a link in there already for me. I'm on every morning 7:30ish, and I am working through this amazing book called "It Didn't Start With You" by Mark Wolin, and it's all about epigenetics. And a friend of mine's and I are walking through that. We kind of crawl through it paragraph by paragraph and deal with the historical stuff as well as the current stuff. I am on right here on YouTube as well. I have a YouTube page. Don't ask me what it is. I think it's if you just type my name in, Sandra Bishop, it'll come out. I'm on Instagram, and I think that's San Bishop, SAN, but Bishop, but I don't post on there nearly as much. I'm working on my book. I'm in ministry, and just, all of this stuff fascinates me. Whether we're going through mythology or psychology or I'm into philosophy. I'm into all of it. I just love this stuff, as y'all can tell. It gets me excited. So yeah, you can find me.
And you're also, correct me if I'm wrong, a teacher of A Course in Miracles.
Yes,
it's one of my favorite things to study.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Currently on hiatus at the moment, but that'll be starting up again soon.
Yeah. At some point, and I've been telling you this, Miss Sandra, that I want to have a conversation with you, especially for the healing of the feminine, all things feminine, stuff like that. And Lynea has helped me even heal those areas. And I have stories to share. And I'm sure lots of people would like to know, how do you heal all parts of you, and especially owning your sexuality and your sensuality? You can't just have bits and pieces of yourself. You are a whole being, and that's included in your perfect wholeness. So I hope to have you both back for that. And Sterling, I want to get some more men on here at some point. We'll have many more stories to talk about with P-Valley. You guys, we're not having an episode on Sunday, but when we come back, it's just picking up where we left off times 1,000. So we will have tons and tons more to talk about. Reverend Cherie will be back, and we will continue to hold this space for whoever shows up. If you showed up today, if you find this video, whenever you find it, this space was for you and prepared for you for a reason. So I hope you all receive this in the love that I intend for it to be. And I'm so grateful for everyone here, the speakers, friends and family, and my new friends here on Instagram and Facebook and everywhere. So, all right, y'all, that's all for now. And I'll see y'all next week.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Peace and love, everybody.
Thank y'all so much.
Yes, blessings to you.
All righty, bye-bye.
Good night.